Thus far, we have learned a lot about different types of verbs in the present tense. Two verbs that we have learned is ser and estar. Ser and estar are an excellent example of times in Spanish when there are two things as opposed to one thing linguistically in English. There are many other examples of this in Spanish, but ser and estar is going to be our topic of discussion for today. Now, other examples of times in Spanish when there would be two as opposed to one are such as formal and informal language when it comes to greetings, and also the verbs that we learned, saber and conocer, which both mean to know. Ser and estar both mean to be, such as I am, or you are, or they are in English. Now, we have already learned both of these verbs, so for now, we're going to assume that you know the conjugation. If you need to refresh on the conjugation of ser or estar, go to your book, so stop the video and do a quick refresh, and then come back if you need to know how to conjugate either one of those verbs before you proceed. Now, we're going to assume that you know the conjugation for both of these verbs since we have been talking about them a lot in class. What are the times when we would use ser in a to-be situation as opposed to estar? This can be a thing that is very confusing for English speakers because we only have one form of this verb. But the test is relatively simple. Now, it is easier, instead of looking at the situation and wondering what of the many possibilities it could fall under, whether that be in ser or in estar, it is easier, instead of doing that, to simply test whether the verb would use estar first. And if it didn't use estar, then to know that by default, you have to use ser. So let's kind of work that together and see how we would do that if we had some examples. Remember that estar is used for three specific instances. It is used for conditions, that means emotional and physical states of being. I am dirty, I am clean, I am happy, I am sad. It is also used for actions, meaning that it is used for the present progressive. I am going, I am doing, I am being, actions that are happening at the time that we're speaking. And it is also used for places, that is to say, where is my current location, or the current location of the person that I'm speaking to. I am in the classroom. I am not in the classroom. I am in the library. Remember that when we talked about estar, we said that it fell within these three categories. Now you might notice something about those categories, and that is that they have a transient element to them. Right now, I might be in the library, but 5 minutes from now, if I went for a walk, I could be at the theater, or I could be at my classroom. It's constantly changing. My location is not a stagnant thing or a permanent thing. It is a thing that is constantly transitioning from one to the next. That is why we would always use estar with location. For actions, for example, right now I might be studying, but later today I might be washing dishes or washing my clothes or going for a walk or watching a movie with some friends. So my current activity, which is what I would use the present progressive for, is something that is also constantly in flux. It is constantly changing. My emotional and physical states of being are also changing. Because if I went out and I played soccer with my friends, I might come back inside and take a nice shower and get all nice and clean. Within 5 minutes, I've gone from being dirty with all that soot to being clean. My emotional state of being could also constantly change. I could be having the most amazing day and be so happy and get a call that says that my Aunt Gertrude died and immediately be sad. Or I could have a sad day and someone could bring me a gift or do something nice and put a smile on my face. So these are things, right, that are constantly in flux. So when we think of estar, we always want to think of things that are transient, things that will change relatively quickly and in a small span of time, say within a day, for example. When we think about Ser, we want to think about things that involve more permanence, such as where am I from nationally, or even where's my city of origin? What am I like as a person? I am a nice person. I'm a mean person. Those are all things that have a slight amount of permanence. What is my profession? What is my career? Those are things that have elements of permanence to them. Even date and time, because even though the day and the time changes every day and every hour, or even every minute, those things are always the same from day to day, such as March 14th will always come every year. It doesn't matter what year it is, it's gonna have a March 14th. Even though there's not leap year every year, it will happen every 4 years. So there is an element of permanence to those things. So when we think about the difference between ser and estar, that is one clear-cut way to think about the difference between the two. Estar will always be things that are slightly transient, or things that would change within the span of a day, or even within a few hours. Ser is for situations that maintain an element of permanence, because even if perhaps my personality changes, it will probably change over time. It won't change in a day or in a few hours. My character as a person will remain kind of the same over time, or it may change, but it would change very slowly. So it has a kind of element of permanence about it. So let's look at an example and how we would kind of go about figuring out whether we are going to use ser or estar. Remember I said that it is easier to begin by figuring out whether I would use estar and then progress into whether or not I would need ser. Okay, so how would I do that? So let's take our first example. Ricardo y yo en el parque. I know that I am either going to use ser or estar. Those are my two possibilities with that sentence. So I think to myself, okay, Professor Macbeth said I need to start with figuring out if it's estar first, and then if it's not, I know by default that it's going to be ser. So I'm going to ask myself, okay, let me go through the three possibilities that it could be. Could it be a condition? That is to say, an emotional or physical state of being. Is being in the park an emotional or physical state of being? Not really. So it would not be a condition. Is being in the park an action? Is it something that I am currently doing? Well, not really. If I was saying that I was sitting in the park, or I was reading in the park, or I was writing in the park, well, then maybe that might be an action. But in its current status, it's not really an action. Is it where I am physically located at right now? It is. It is my physical current location. So I know immediately, by having just gone through 3 different categories, that I have to use estar, and I don't have to go any further. That's the benefit of figuring out whether I would use estar first, and then, if not, using ser, because I only have to know particularly, or very particularly, the 3 different categories in detail, and if it does not fall within those 3 categories, then I know I can default to ser. So here, I've gone through my 3 categories, and it does use estar, so I would write estamos. So let's look at our second example and see how that might work out. Here I have, right, María Teresa, and then I have a blank, rígida y inflexible. What am I saying about María Teresa? I'm saying she's very rigid and she's inflexible. Well, let's ask ourselves then if it would use estar. Let's go through our test to see which we would use, ser or estar, right? And remember, we always start with estar to see if we would use that one first, and we go through our 3 categories, and if it doesn't fall within those categories, then we're going to use ser. So let's ask ourselves, is being rigid and inflexible an emotional or physical state of being? It isn't really, although I know that personality traits tend to be something that people think as being transient, but they're really not, because it's not like being happy or sad or content or something of that nature. It is also not like being dirty or busy or ready to go, because those are things that are very quickly done, and also emotional, right? Being rigid and inflexible doesn't have anything to do with your emotions. It has to do with your character, and therein lies the difference. So, okay, so it's not a condition. Is it an action? Well, I can act rigid and inflexible, but that's not really what I'm saying. I'm saying that this is how she is. Is it a part of her current location? Well, it isn't, because I don't really even know where she is, according to the sentence. So I've gone through all of my 3 categories, and the answer to all 3 questions is no. No, it doesn't fall under any of those 3 categories. So I know by default that if it did not fall within those 3 categories, that the only other possibility is to use ser. So I fill in my blank with ser. María Teresa es rígida y inflexible. I'm describing her characteristics as a person. So there is an extensive list of these different categories of what times you would use ser and what times you would use estar. But this is just a little method that is a quicker way for you to figure out which is which. So here are 3 categories, and they go into more detail in your book. One that is good to remember that is always going to fall under estar is also weather expressions. For example, está nublado for it's cloudy, or está lloviendo for it's raining. It would always use estar, and that makes sense, right? Because the weather changes from day to day, and even from year to year, you can't count on weather being the same. So it doesn't have any type of element of permanence about it. Here are 4 categories that it's important to remember will always use ser. So these are just some kind of quick notes for you. Origin and nationality, profession, characteristics, and time and dates. Again, there's a more extensive list in your book. All right, now that we have learned the difference between ser and estar, what I would like for you to do is practice a little bit. In your book, on page 164, you can find some of the differences between ser and estar. Now, here, what I would like for you to do is on a note card, I would like for you to write 2 ways that you would use ser, right? For example, origin and profession, and then write a sentence that reflects those elements, right? For example, origin might be something like, yo soy de Guatemala, and profession might be something like, yo soy doctora. On the back of that same note card, I would like you to write 2 instances that you would use estar, and then 2 sentences that reflect those situations. For example, estar you might use for weather or emotional states of being. So, for example, está nublado would be an example of a weather condition. It's cloudy outside. Or an emotional state of being. Eliana está cansada. Eliana is tired. And then when you get into class, just put it on the corkboard, and I will check it whenever I get a moment. And as always, be prepared to share in case I decide to call on you. Thanks, and I will see you in class.